Hey everyone, it's Raghu. I'm back with Mindrolling and Melvin McLeod. Melvin, many of you know who Melvin is because especially all you Buddhists out there. I mean, Lion's Roar and Melvin has really been instrumental in helping expose a Buddhist philosophy, psychology, practice, and in all ways. So, Melvin, welcome, and
Thanks very much for having me.
I appreciate the work that you've done.
No, thank you so much.
So, anyhow, we just found out we're both from Montreal. I had no idea. Okay, so tell me a little bit about mostly, I mean, growing up, but also what turned you on to actually get involved the way you have done in your adult life. And I mean, my story, I always tell this, it's the same deal. I was a screwed up teenager who was looking to, how do I get out of this society and the dictums of school and parents and all. So it was a rebellion that set me off. And you? What happened?
Well, I actually don't think it was rebellion. I don't know what it was really. I mean, from a Buddhist point of view, you might say karma. My story is a fairly conventional baby boomer story. I went to college in the late 60s and early 70s. I took drugs that revealed to me that reality was not exactly always what I thought it would be. And that began a spiritual journey, really. I mean, it's said in a way that people come to Buddhism, and maybe this is true of the spiritual path in general, from one of two motivations or one of two angles. One is, which you were suggesting was true for yourself, to relieve suffering, to find a way to be happy in life and contented and to feel in harmony with life. The other angle is to come at it from the point of view of wanting to understand what this universe and what this life is about. And I think that's the angle that I came at it from. Of course, the interesting thing is that, at least from a Buddhist point of view, if one comes to it looking for an answer for suffering, to one's surprise, one finds that the answer to suffering is understanding. Conversely, if one comes at it from the angle of looking to try to understand what this life and this universe is about, one discovers to one's surprise that it is indeed the answer to suffering. So the two meet in the middle, but we come at it from two different angles. So I believe that I had an urge deep in me to try to understand. And when I discovered Buddhism in a moment of clear epiphany, sitting in the newsroom of the old Montreal Star newspaper where I was working as a police reporter, I knew that this thing called Buddhism, if anything was going to provide me with the answer of what this life was about, it was that.
Wow. That's a moment. The Montreal Star. Oh my God, that doesn't exist anymore.
It does not.
You know what? You said one word that really was the thing that set me off. Yes, I was fairly unhappy teenager for all sorts of reasons, family and so on and so forth. But one day I was walking, I forget where I was. I think it was in somebody's house, but they had a poster. It was a poster of Mayor Baba. Do you know who that is?
Sure.
Yeah. And big smiling face, and he said, "Don't worry, be happy." I'll never forget that. I used to talk to Ram Dass about it because he got turned on by Mayor Baba first, in terms of Eastern anything, as well as I. And happiness. Oh, let me tell you a little slight other thing that happened a few years later from my seeing Mayor Baba and "Don't worry, be happy." I was in India with Neem Karoli Baba, and my father decided to visit my brother and I under the guise of, I want to, I want to see what's going on here. Because we were writing him and saying, this is extraordinary and everything. But, reality was I had a terrible childhood with my father, who was a PTSD pilot in World War II. So he's there. He meets Neem Karoli Baba, we call him Maharaji, and who says to my father, "Why did you come?" And my father said, "Well, I wanted to see how my sons were doing." And Maharaji said, "Well, so how are they doing?" And my father said, "Well, they seem to be happy." And Maharaji said, "Happiness is everything." And I can remember even thinking back then, we're talking about a deep contentment kind of thing with what all is. That was the more of the message. So, and you talk about this in your book. Oh, I don't have the cover. You're going to have to show the book, Melvin.
I'm afraid I'd have to leave the broadcast and go upstairs.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to put it in the show notes. And Melvin,
I can tell you what it's called. I know that.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Start there.
It's called
One
With a Single Breath,
Beth.
The Complete Path of Mindfulness.
Yeah.
And it's an attempt to offer a new framework for mindfulness, indeed, as a complete path of life. And hopefully that will constitute the next step forward in the historic development of the mindfulness movement.
Yeah. And in it, why I'm speaking to happiness, which being happy, and which you, Melvin, did speak to as well, is this is a central part of what you have been trying to do with this book. That is central to it. It is not, a lot of people. I mean, mindfulness has become a ubiquitous term, especially in the spiritual area community. And, it's been dragged around in different ways. And, I can't tell you how many books or people or speakers or presenters or whatever who want to get on the podcast around that particular subject. And I see myself going, okay, enough. And so this was good for me, this book, because it has a tack. It was sailing into a place of discovery around this particular practice that I thought was really important, which is why we're here today.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think Buddhism, and, as you've been talking about, addresses the issue of suffering and relief from suffering. But in a way, that's only the absence of a negative. And I think it's actually, we can be more positive and say that actually we want to be happy. And I actually believe that even more than that, we want to lead happy, meaningful, and beneficial lives. That's what we all long for as human beings. Not simply to be happy, but for our lives and our activities to have meaning and to benefit ourselves and others. And what I proposed is that when we see mindfulness, not simply as a helpful meditation technique, but as a complete path of life that can offer us the opportunity or a path toward leading happy, meaningful, and beneficial lives and having a better society.
Mm. Maybe talk about at least the bones of what you're sharing in relation to what you call complete mindfulness.
Absolutely. Well, to go back to the beginning, as you suggested, there is a kind of broad, popular definition of mindfulness as the basic practice of being present, following the breath, and returning to the present again when one gets lost in thought. And that is a foundational technique of mindfulness, and is very beneficial in some concrete, specific ways to one's health, well-being. But it's only really the foundation of the practice. And so what I proposed is 5 keys that constitute mindfulness as a complete practice that benefits our lives, the lives of those around us, and society as a whole. And they are mindfulness, the practice we just discussed, which now millions of people are doing and benefiting from, the key element, insight. In fact, mindfulness is a two-part practice consisting of focus or concentration, which is what people have largely defined as mindfulness, but the real payoff comes in the second half of the practice, in the development of insight, of understanding who we really are and what this reality is that we're experiencing. Albeit that is a single practice, ultimately, I've divided it into two. That then leads to love and compassion, because mindfulness does not only open the mind, it opens the heart. The fourth of the four keys of complete mindfulness, as I've defined it, are ethics, how we act in the world personally and in our roles as citizens, consumers, activists, in order to fulfill our values. At heart, we all want to create benefit. We all want to lead beneficial lives for ourselves and others. The practice of ethics gives us concrete ways to do that. And then finally, the fruition of the path, as indeed the fruition of life itself, is our heart connection with other beings, with other people, indeed with the entire universe. So while mindfulness is popularly defined simply as the initial practice of focusing or concentration, I've proposed a 5-part path that makes mindfulness a complete and transformative approach to life, which again, to summarize, are mindfulness meditation, insight, love and compassion, ethics, and community or connection.
Can you talk about teachers that you have met that you would really point to as being a product of these practices and what that meant to you in terms of just, I mean, I speak to it with Neem Karoli Baba because that's our bellwether. Yeah, what about teachers that you've run into and that really, stories that exemplify what you're speaking to?
Well, there are two people who I identify in the book as the creators of the modern mindfulness movement. And I've been fortunate enough to have known both of them. One is, of course, Jon Kabat-Zinn, who is renowned as the founder of the mainstream or secular mindfulness movement. Jon is a great teacher himself and a figure of historic importance. The other person whom I consider to be the creator of the mindfulness movement in the modern world is the Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, and who is often described as the father of mindfulness, and whose books, such as The Miracle of Mindfulness, present mindfulness in a accessible and yet profound way. And I think both Jon and Thich Nhat Hanh, who I've had the honor of interviewing several times, saw mindfulness, albeit that both of them come from a Buddhist tradition, see mindfulness or saw mindfulness as a practice of universal applicability that could benefit all beings, all people. And each of them saw that by presenting it in a straightforward, in Jon's case, non-religious way, in Thich Nhat Hanh's case, a lightly held Buddhist way, that mindfulness was, because it accesses universal human capabilities, such as the simple capability to pay attention, as well as universal human longings. That longing, again, to lead a happy life, a beneficial life, and a meaningful life. That they saw that taken out of the narrow confines of a religious framework, that mindfulness could be something that could ultimately benefit millions of people deeply and help us have a better world. And so I am deeply inspired by each of them in their brilliance in seeing the universal applicability of mindfulness, of seeing it as a complete path, and of being willing to transcend the limitations or what is in some case the barriers of their own specific religious tradition in order to present this in a way that could, I think, ends up creating what hopefully will be a genuine, new, contemplative tradition that is brilliantly designed for modern people. So these are the two people. Oh, I've had many Buddhist teachers. In this context, these are the two people I am most inspired by, both in their own ways, spiritual geniuses.
You know, oh, maybe tell people, though, that might not know about Thich Nhat Hanh, where he came from and what
Sure, Thich Nhat
he
Hanh
came through
was,
some real suffering. I mean, beyond.
indeed. Thich Nhat Hanh really, I believe, was the most important spiritual teacher of this age. He was Vietnamese. He was became a monk at the age of 16 in Vietnam. Was a progressive, not only deeply educated in Buddhist philosophy and practice, but in Western studies and psychoanalysis and Western thought. He was a reformer in the Vietnamese world and a renowned peace activist at a young age. We're talking about when he was very primarily in the American War, although he was a young man when the French were fighting to maintain Vietnam as a colonial possession. He was he created a group of courageous young peace activists in Vietnam, and out of which came the whole philosophy of what came to be known as engaged Buddhism, in which it is seen that dealing with the untold suffering that is caused by political, economic systems, and recognizing that Buddha's basic vow is to help relieve suffering, that it was incumbent upon Buddhists as an integral part of that vow to address the political, social, environmental causes of suffering. He was, because as a true peace activist, he had alienated those on both sides in the war. He was forced into exile in the that would be in the early 1970s, and established himself in France and went on to become one of the leading Buddhist teachers of this age. I think who gave the world two historic contributions. One was what became the worldwide movement of engaged Buddhism that ended up encompassing all Buddhists who see that action on the political level, the social level, the economic level was an integral part of their practice. And he gave the world this universal, clear, accessible, and yet profound understanding of mindfulness. So overall, an extraordinary man of courage, a poet, an artist, a deeply educated Buddhist, as well as probably the person who most effectively integrated Buddhism with modern thought and modern world. And so, as I say, who gave the world two great gifts of both engaged Buddhism and mindfulness. So that's what Thich Nhat Hanh was. And I've had the honor of editing 3 books of his teachings, as well as interviewing several times. If any of your audience, if any of you listening to this now, are interested in learning more about Buddhism in a clear, accessible, and yet deep and poetic way, read one of Thich Nhat Hanh's books. I cannot recommend anyone more.
Yeah, I agree. What do you think, though? I mean, engaged Buddhism. I mean, I knew or I knew him not very well, but Roshi Burney, and he did a lot of great work in New York City, particularly. He had that bakery and so on. And I know Ram Dass went on a thing with him. They just lived on the streets, without any money to replicate that reality. But in a broader sense, why don't we have that happening in where we are right now, which is in a very tough place? on multiple levels, environmental, economic, political, all of it, and the polarization is extreme. Why do you think we don't have someone emerging like a Thich Nhat Hanh here?
Well, I mean, Thich Nhat Hanh's don't come along very often. If one is the greatest Buddhist teacher of a century, they only come along once every century.
Yeah.
Bernie Glassman's don't come along very often. I mean, the sad fact is that many Buddhists are deeply committed to social progress, to social justice, to opposing oppression. But let's be fair. The world of capital B Buddhism, particularly among Americans, is a rather small world that is not all that influential anymore. It is true, on the other hand, that the so-called peace monks on their walk across the United States inspired millions of people. My guess is that some 2 million people probably saw them in person. So I guess I would say
that's
they're there. That's the most recent example of Buddhists who inspired people with a deep commitment to peace that people could feel at a visceral level.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And the dog, okay, for people who had no connection to anything, but not everybody, but we are all very enamored and have dogs are a kind of leading comfort and represent something, and this dog did a Aloka.
Aloka the peace dog.
Yeah.
He had like millions of followers on Facebook. Yeah. But I mean, I would say this, that we could talk about Buddhism and its commitment to peace. But I think the issue is really interreligious. It's interfaith. The world's problems are so deep, and our personal problems are so deep, society's problems are so deep, that only a truly deep solution and only truly deep practices are going to be able to answer those things. And so I believe that it is even more incumbent upon followers of all religions to come forward and to present themselves as agents of change, as agents of justice. Having said that, of course, the premise of my book is that the powerful practices of personal and societal transformation that are traditionally associated and offered by religion are not available to many people because they're, for very good reasons, highly skeptical of institutionalized religion. And what I believe the great historic contribution of the mindfulness movement is that when mindfulness is seen not simply as a helpful meditation technique, but as a complete path of life, that it can offer the same kind of powerful tools for personal and societal transformation traditionally only offered by religion in an evidence-driven, modern, common-sense format for all those people who are not especially interested in following a capital R religious path. And so, again, I would say that if we're talking about social justice and social change, it's incumbent upon practitioners of all religions to stand up with compassion, with ethics, with concern for others and their well-being. And all of us can follow one of those paths. And now, ideally, there can be a path we can follow that achieves the same kind of powerful transformation and powerful contribution, but that does not necessarily involve adopting a formal religion.
I want to read something, Melvin, from the book. And this is this concept everybody understands intellectually, but I'm not sure about the depth of it for all of us to really realize. And that's interbeing. I mean, he spoke so profoundly on this particular subject. So you're right. He described interbeing this way, quote unquote, everything is interacting with every other thing. Interbeing means you don't have a separate existence. You are with everything else. And you say this is not merely a philosophical concept, it's an insight into the living nature of interbeing that heals the feelings of isolation and separateness that haunt and depress us. It creates the deep and intimate connection with all things that bring real love and peace into our lives. This is probably it's a great statement, Melvin, in this book, but why don't we just parse it out a little bit, because no one will counter the reality of that's going on around isolation and feelings of separateness. I mean, that is just so real. The getting into this concept of interconnectedness, interbeing, that creates, as you say, a deep and intimate connection with all things. How do we get there? How do we really move in a direction that's not just, somebody said we should do this, that, or the other. We should meditate more. We should, have more mindfulness and all of that being true. But what are we talking about when we say deep and intimate connection with all things from a very substantial, personal point of view?
Well, that's why we need insight, which leads to a direct, visceral perception of reality as it is. So, as I said, mindfulness is a two-part practice, and it reflects the two basic capabilities of mind, what I would describe as our natural mindfulness. We have the ability to experience things inside us, like thoughts and feelings, things outside of us, like perceptions, like phenomena. The second capability of mind is that we have the native intelligence to actually understand the nature of what we are experiencing. And so mindfulness practice actually is a specific practice for deepening and cultivating both of those aspects of mind. So in the first step, we learn to calm the mind, to focus the mind, to develop the power of concentration, to tame the wild, flailing around, always distracted mind we usually have. And when that mind is then calmed, we can then look at reality, both our internal reality as well as external reality, in a stable, sustained, and deep way. And we can start to see its true nature. And we can start to correct some of the fundamental cognitive errors we make in terms of how we understand who we are and what this reality is that we are experiencing.
Can you give an example? That's good.
I can indeed. So, and this is all traditional, and in a way that, albeit that on an intellectual level, we may know this is not true, but on a visceral, moment-by-moment level, we believe that we and all the things we are perceiving are separate objects. They have their own separate identities. We have our own separate identities. We believe that at their core, these things have some sort of permanent essence, or at least we hope they do, because we're desperately trying to avoid the reality that we might actually die and cease to exist. And so we struggle desperately to maintain the belief that there's something in us that is permanent. And we believe we are in charge of our own lives. We are independent. But in fact, we are not. We are the creation of infinite causes and conditions that lead us to exist, that contribute to our existence. And not only that, but so here is a classic meditation taught by Thich Nhat Hanh that any of us can do, and let's do it right now. And it doesn't involve anything mystical, anything spiritual.
Whoa, we got to sit up straight and act
no,
like
we don't have to do any of those things. It's all very common sense. So let's put a flower in front of us, or at least do that mentally. Or if we were at home and wanted to try this another time, put a real flower in front of you. On the face of it, you'd say, well, that flower exists and it's separate, and there it is, and it's got its own existence. But now begin a process of looking at the causes and conditions that brought that flower, that bring that flower into existence. The light that causes it to exist, the heat, the warmth, the water, the rain, the soil, the previous generations of living creatures who made that soil fertile. And what we discover is, and this is what Thich Nhat Hanh teaches, is that in that flower, as long as we look at it and go through the list of all the things that contribute to its existence, we find that pretty much everything in the entire universe is present in that flower, that it is interdependent, it is interbeing, it is inter-or with all of the other things in the universe in a great, complex, infinite web of living cause and effect. However, Thich Nhat Hanh said, and this is something we can do ourselves now as we sit here, we can look at that flower and say, can we somewhere in that flower find some sort of immutable flowerness, any sort of permanent core of that flower that is not the creation of outside causes and conditions? So Thich Nhat Hanh, and indeed, I think if you do that, you will find that you cannot find any flower, permanent flower inside that flower. As Thich Nhat Hanh said, in a flower, the entire universe is present except one thing, a permanent self of flower. And then if you want to go even further, and this is a contemplation that I have in the book, you can do that with yourself. You can start to look at all the things, I can start to look at all the things that brought Melvin McLeod into existence. My parents and grandparents on a biological level. My parents and grandparents on a psychological level, for better or worse. The whole society contributing to my existence, to my thoughts, to my beliefs, to my values, to my existence, and not only that, of course, all the same things on a biological level that contribute to the existence of the flower. I need air. I need water. I need light. I need heat. Again, present in me is the entire, as causes and conditions that cause me to exist, is the entire universe in a great infinite play of interbeing. However, once again, if I look inside, I cannot find any independent, permanent Melvin McLeod that is not the result of outside causes and conditions. So right off the bat, a very common sense contemplation. Any of us can do it at any time. There's nothing all that mystical or spiritual about it. It's simply looking at a flower and saying, what is contributing to the existence of that flower? And looking at yourself and saying, what is contributing, what has made me exist? And I think that's the kind of contemplation that leads into insight into what reality really is and who we really are in a way that can help relieve our sense of separateness, of constant struggle to maintain ourselves, to defend ourselves, to please ourselves, when in fact there's nothing inside to defend and please. We're just part of this great, beautiful, infinite web of interbeing, of living causes and conditions. So,
yeah. But doesn't the insight that is gained from these practices, yes, the realization of impermanence is certainly, I mean, just go into, the meditation that we were spending a lot of time doing back in the day till now, as a matter of fact, is, Vipassana. It's a very right-on, powerful meditation. And that you would be scanning through at one point when the concentration was there and seeing the, arising and dissolution of cells inside yourself. At the same time, there was some connectivity to that thing that wasn't your personality, your ego manifestation or anything. But we absolutely, when we went to India, we found that through this particular being who manifested that, who was not at all involved in any kind of polarization inside at all. And so we experienced that, and we started to say, okay, there is that something else. We have no idea what it is, but does not that insight that comes along with these practices and so on reveal true nature?
I think it does. And it reveals not only the true nature of phenomena, including ourselves, but it can reveal a true nature beyond phenomena. For you,
Yeah.
you said, I believe, something like we had no idea what it was. Well,
Yeah.
we actually can. And again, in the book, I propose a contemplation or an investigation into not the nature of the objects of awareness, such as perception, such as things, such as thoughts, such as feelings, but into the nature of the awareness itself, to look not at what we were experiencing, but at the nature of the experiencer. And it is possible actually to separate the two. And the famous phrases are to take the backward step or to turn the light inward. And I think what we can discover, that we discover the true nature of relative transient phenomena, which is liberating in itself, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, we can discover a level of mind, a more fundamental nature of mind that is got no specific identity or specific characteristics. In fact, is beyond all of those things. Is in effect simply pure awareness. And so it's said, and I know that John Kabat-Zinn has talked about this. The key to mindfulness at its most profound is awareness of awareness itself. And so I think that that's the ultimate level where I think it's important for us to understand the nature of this life we are living now, of this embodiment that we have now, of these things that we are experiencing. But most important of all is then to turn that light inward and say, what is the true nature of the experiencer? What is the mind? To not look at the objects of mind, but look straight at the very nature of mind itself. Once again, and this is of course taught in religious traditions, but once again, I don't think this is inherently religious or spiritual. It's simply common sense. Take a look and see what's behind the perceptions of us talking now.
Yeah.
Who's perceiving that? It's worth asking that to yourself.
Yeah.
You may or may not find any answer. And perhaps the only answer is that there is no answer. And the answer is no answer. No answer is the answer.
Very Zen.
Or true, or simply true.
Or simply true. But now people are going to, all of us who've gone through being seekers and on the path and really taking these practices seriously. You have a little thing in the book that enunciates that which the mind creates. And I was reading through this, I'm going, yeah, this is one way to wake up, wake someone up. Hey, is this happening? Anxiety, depression, worry, self-criticism, repetitive thought patterns, strong negative emotions, emotional numbness, resentment, despair, irrational thoughts and fears. The list of ways our mind can torture us goes on and on. That would seem to be enough to propel one into, okay, this is a practice the same way I'm practicing brushing my teeth every day. This is a necessary thing so that we are not completely at the, at the mercy of our minds, And you say, headed by death and illness, the list of life's real difficulties and conflicts is long. But when anything arises, it's your mind that determines how you react to them, and that makes all the difference, right?
Absolute mind is both the creator of unhappiness and the creator potentially of happiness. And I would say that the nice thing there, I mean, the mindfulness world is so full of great teachers offering really practical advice. And so, actually, the longest chapter in the book is about love and compassion, and largely about love and compassion towards yourself. And I can only recommend um, some of the techniques that are taught in the book. And I would like to make clear now that
Mm.
at best I have written only half of this book. That half of the book are practices and teachings by really most of the leading mindfulness teachers of this age.
Mm.
And so this book, I hope, offers in itself a useful framework and some, I hope, helpful thoughts by me, but it's also a collection of the teachings and practices taught by the leading mindfulness teachers of this period. And in regard to those ways in which mind tortures us, you could try to be very philosophical about it. But again, I think there are practical step-by-step methods. And of course, I think the RAIN method, taught largely by Tara
Tara,
Brach,
yeah.
um, that helps us to recognize what's going through our minds, to
Mm.
acknowledge their existence, to investigate what's really at their root, and in the end, and this is the key, to not necessarily identify ourselves with what's passing through our minds and causing us a lot of torment. The path of mindfulness is about taming the mind, about taming the wild mind that is all over the place, that is causing us all kinds of suffering with its thoughts and emotions.
Mm.
But once we can begin a process by starting with a calming process and then deepening that so that we can really start to see that our mind then becomes not simply, well, not simply, but our mind ceases to become a source of unhappiness
Mm.
and becomes the source of true happiness and meaning that it actually is.
Mm.
So that's the fundamental premise, that the most important source of both suffering and happiness is the mind, and the way to actually to the path is actually working with mind itself.
Mm-hmm.
That then leads us, of course, to act differently in all the different good things as that unfolds into our lives.
Mm. I have to give a shout out here. I mean, you're shouting out, incredible teachers. But in terms of the culture, I think I have to give a shout out here. When we talk about mindfulness, which allows us to inhabit the moment, right? Be here now. Okay, we got to give a shout out to Ram Dass on that.
Right.
And that was so central. In the end, I don't know if you were aware or whatever, but in the end, so he was in Maui for the last 15, 17 years of his life, and in that process, it was all for him about loving awareness, right?
Yep.
And that was the meditation he taught. That was the perspective he gave people, and that to me really connected with the obvious wonderful slogan "Be Here Now," related to mindfulness. Actually, when he first came back he was interested in Gurdjieff, and so Gurdjieff had this method of I know Spensky. I can't remember who did what, but just around inhabiting a moment and sort of taking a picture of it. I think it was called remembering of some sort. I mean, I don't really recall the whole thing, but yeah, I think that in the case of these particular people, we owe them really for introducing what this is.
That's absolutely correct. And I think, I'm sorry.
No, go.
Well, I was going to say that when I think about it, I probably should have acknowledged in the book that "Be Here Now" was the pithiest and most powerful statement of the fundamental truths of mindfulness in the society. And I suppose you could argue that that was really the albeit that it was largely presented in a religious or Hindu framework, that was really, or that even transcended that, but nonetheless that was really, that was the implantation of the fundamental truth of being present in the society. So I think that's absolutely true. I also think, and my dear friends Jack Kornfield and Trudy Goodman often quote Ram Dass. I know they were both close to him.
Yeah.
That I think that loving awareness is really the best encapsulation of the practice overall. And of course, as I said, I created a path in which after the first two halves of the practice, the next step is love and compassion.
Yeah.
Beginning, of course, with self-compassion. But I think there is a misconception of mindfulness as some sort of neutral, clinical observation of oneself. And that's wrong. It has to be based on a feeling of warmth and caring towards oneself. Otherwise, how can you look at yourself with all of your flaws? You have to look at yourself as any friend would, as you would to anybody you loved and cared for yourself. And then in turn, you then turn that same loving awareness out to the world and to others around you. So I think both of those slogans you quote are both very, very important and very accurate. I would say that loving awareness is probably the best single definition of mindfulness that I know.
Wow. Okay, so I want to bring up, we talked about this before we got on, but I want to bring up one other teacher who you just told me before. I only saw her one time. Okay, Melvin, I never got to see her. I've loved her since I first met her through her teaching, anyhow, through Ram Dass, who did a fantastic interview with her many, many years ago. But what, she brought to the table, so to speak, that, I think it's worth us talking about. She talked about how to counteract the crippling of the modern self, which is cruelly contained. This is we can put this up, Melvin, right? We can put a link up to the interview you did in Lion's Roar with her.
Oh, I'm sure you can,
yeah.
Yes.
As in a
By the
prison.
way, you may be just being very dramatic, but you have yet to tell us who you're talking about.
Oh, my God. Thank you.
No, but that's a technique. You could tease us now for a few minutes and then say the big reveal. We're talking about
Joanna Macy.
Yes.
Who left us maybe a couple of years ago. I'm not really sure. She said, as I look back over the millennia of humanity's journey, it's hard to imagine another time when we were so cruelly isolated by the illusion of a separate self and by a political economy that pits us against each other. I mean, this is so powerful a statement of where we are. Can you comment on that? Because mindfulness has been around for a long time, and different practices addressing it. God, I just read what she said and I go, yeah, absolutely. This is a severe moment, huh?
Well, I think that's true. I mean, I'm not a person who necessarily romanticizes the past. We've always had these terrible problems as human beings. However, it is also true that, well, I don't know. I mean, boy, there's been a whole series of really bad social systems.
Right.
And we could say, oh, capitalism is the worst, but I don't know. Feudalism wasn't that great.
So good,
either. But either way, there's no doubt. I mean, I have to really acknowledge the contribution of the sort of eco-philosopher David Loy.
Oh,
because, and this is Buddhism, but it's again common sense, that our problems are largely created in addition to that fundamental ignorance about not about really misunderstanding who we are as human beings in ways that damage us and others terribly. That that misunderstanding then expresses itself in three very damaging ways. One is through grasping or greed or attachment, i.e., hey, there's something good there. I want it for myself. The
Mm,
second way is through aggression. Oh, there's something bad there. Take it away. Get rid of it. And the third is through indifference. If it doesn't affect me, I don't care. And it is true that all through history, these three functions, which are as simple as for me, against me, couldn't care.
hmm
That's our
hmm
sort of basic
Yeah.
self-involved attitude to life. The social systems we created have always been based on those three principles, but it is true now in the modern world that those three poisons, as they're known in Buddhism, of passion, aggression or anger, and indifference, are deeply embedded in the system in a way that's more elaborate and more massive than ever before in history, and that we all have a fundamental obligation to recognize how the current social system embeds selfishness, is embedded. I mean, going back to my teenage days as an Ayn Randist, I mean,
Oh yeah.
it's all about me is basically the
hmm
fundamental. It's all selfishness is is the virtue of capitalism,
Yeah.
to quote and misquote Ayn Rand. But I think that what Joanna Macy points us to is that in the end, yes, we can have political solutions. We can have economic solutions. We can make things somewhat better. We can reform. And those are good things. But in the end, these problems are so deep, they're so almost primeval,
Mm.
that the only solutions to them are the deep solutions that are offered primarily by contemplative practice, either in a religious context or in a secular mindfulness context. Deep, almost insolvable problems can only be solved with deep, fundamental solutions that get right at the root of who we are as people.
Yeah. Yeah. A shout out here to our mutual love, Mirabai Bush, because
Yes.
with Contemplative Mind, that wonderful organization that went out exactly in the kind to the kinds of places that that opening got created. And I mean, what she did, and we're talking Monsanto, we're talking about the army. I mean, just amazing, amazing work. And, that seems to be the more of that I don't know, I'm sure there's other nonprofits that are concerned with this, but when you said contemplative, that is something that we really can use as an anchor to not fall into, especially fall into despair over the realities that we are living in, huh?
I'm not sure there's any other real solution, to be honest. And I too want to acknowledge Mirabai, whom I think many of your listeners will know, a longtime associate, friend of Ram Dass's, co-wrote a book with him.
Mm-hmm.
I love Mirabai, like so many of us, one of the great people. And I think that, she was key in the contemplative mind in society, as well as search inside yourself. These were attempts to
Mm,
bring the contemplative practices of awareness and open heart into the conventional society.
mm,
And I think they were, I'm not sure, I think that they were a Trojan horse that
mm,
in the end, those companies figured out. There is a common misconception that if mindfulness is simply a practice of calming and concentration, that it can be used to have more effective and compliant employees. And that famous example would be the sniper who practices mindfulness to concentrate his mind so that he can kill better, or companies that want to use mindfulness to lower absenteeism and have more productivity. But and but anybody who brings mindfulness and of course contemplative practice, such as Mirabai, pioneered a contemplative mind in society and search inside yourself, they're going to be surprised because they think that by bringing those into their companies, they're going to get employees who are more asleep. But in fact, they're going to get employees who are much more awake. And as long as it's mindfulness practice in its completeness, including insight into how the companies truly act, including compassion for oneself and one's fellow employees and consumers, and ethics, you're going to end up with a lot more troublesome employees. I have a bad feeling that in the end, a lot of those companies said, geez, this isn't really working out the way we thought.
Let's cut that program out.
Yeah, because this is really a Trojan horse. Mindfulness never puts people to sleep. Properly practiced, it only wakes them up.
Yeah. Oh, boy, everybody. By the way, you will go to the show notes and you will get the link to Melvin's book, which I don't have a physical copy. You have to send me a physical, no matter what. Okay, Melvin. And in that same light, since we were talking about Mirabai, she has a book that came out not too long ago called Almost Home. It's a memoir, an incredible life. It's well worth reading. I who have known her for 55 years or whatever, I didn't know some of the things in there. Like, wow, really? Mirabai's got something. And we'll link up to the Joanna Macy article, which I thought there were some profound things that you got out of her in that interview through Lion's Roar. So great to have you.
Oh, I
and
really
meet you
enjoyed
finally, Melvin.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really appreciated your own wisdom and experience.
Thank
it was
you.
great.
Thank you. Yeah. So everybody, you go to Be Here Now Network. You go to Be Here Now Network /Mindrolling, and you'll get all of these link ups in the show notes. And you can also then investigate more of Melvin and my friends, Jack and Trudy and Joseph Goldstein and Sharon. I mean, we have quite a wonderful, big Sangha, don't we? I mean, it really is. And we'll see you all next week on Mindrolling. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody who is listening.